The city glows warm tonight, as if the cold outside has no power here. Through frosted windows, a small diner spills golden light onto the sidewalk, an island of comfort, moored to a tide of indifferent streets. Inside, laughter hums like a jukebox tune. Plates clatter, coffee pours, and the scent of butter on a hot griddle wraps itself around every conversation. Booths are packed with ordinary miracles, families splitting fries, friends trading stories, a nurse thawing out her hands around a mug after a long shift. It's the kind of place where the world feels simple again, where kindness is the house special and no one leaves hungry. But even in rooms like this, the world's blind spots remain. We live in a time that counts followers faster than it counts sacrifices. A season where applause is louder than gratitude, and the people who once stood between us and darkness now sit in the shadows of our attention. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear jackets with frayed elbows and shoes that remember long walks. Some carry a quiet ache in their bones and a memory they don't talk about unless you really ask. Some heroes sit among us, invisible not because they are small, but because we forgot how to see. A server glides by with a smile practiced to perfection, balancing a stack of waffles and a plate of eggs over easy. The bell above the kitchen window dings. The cook calls order up and flips another pancake as if he's turning a page. Cutlery ticks against porcelain. The radio croons an old song about coming home. In the corner, a boy blows out a birthday candle while his parents clap too loudly, because joy is allowed to be loud here. At the counter, a trucker wipes rain off his cap and tells the story of a strange detour and a faithful old engine. The camera drifts, noticing the little proofs of gentleness. A hand that steadies a wobbly saucer. A stranger scooting over to make room at the counter. The way a toddler's giggle makes the tired waitress grin despite herself. This is what we say we area community. A family. Neighbors sharing a roof made of neon and steam. And yet, there's a corner of the room where the noise doesn't quite reach. A space where the light thins thinly a little, like a veil. The narrator's voice lowers, a thread of gravity through the warmth. We measure our days in receipts and schedules, in meetings and notification chimes. But there are debts we cannot itemize. Debts we owe to the quiet ones who shouldered the heavy things so we could carry the light ones. We don't see them often. Sometimes they sit beside us. Sometimes they stand outside the window and wonder if there's still a seat for them inside. As if summoned by the thought, the door opens. A bell above it jingles, the small, hopeful sound of welcome. Cold air folds into the room and is swallowed by heat. Heads lift for a second, just a second. The way people glance at weather. A man steps through the doorway. He pauses, not from uncertainty, but to gather himself with dignity. The way someone does when entering a place that asks for gentle hands. He is older 70s, maybe with a face carved by years rather than by time. His hair, what's left of it, is silver at the temples. His jacket is a faded field green, the kind that once matched a uniform. A patch near the shoulder has been carefully sewn and re-sewn by hands that wanted things to last. He moves with deliberation, not dragging his feet but choosing each step like a promise. A cane helps him, and when the cane taps the tile, it sounds like a small salute. Behind the glass of his eyes live distances most of us will never travel. There is steadiness there, and fatigue, and something like a sunrise that refuses to be chased off by night. On his lapel is a tiny pina flag, dulled by years of weather. He has not come to be noticed. He has come for something simple: a seat, a warm plate, the comfort of being ordinary. He takes off his cap as he crosses the threshold, not because anyone told him to, but because the habit of respect lives deeper than memory. He nods at the hostess. His smile is real, if small. He waits for the bustle to find a pocket for him, as if he has been practicing how not to be in the way. Around him, life keeps moving. The waffle lands, the birthday wish dissolves into crumbs and frosting. The radio rolls into the next song. A few glances linger a heartbeat longer. Curious, courteous, uncertain. One man looks at the cane, then looks away. A teenage girl notices the pin and nudges her father, whispering a guess she can't quite voice. Mostly people return to their coffee. The narrator returns too, softer now, closer. Once he stood so others could sit. Once he walked miles so others could rest. Once he carried more than a pack, he carried names. Tonight he asks for something smaller than he has given 1,000 times. A place at the table, a hot meal that tastes like belonging. The hostess gestures toward a booth beneath the diner's old clock. The manor veteran thanks her with the kind of gratitude that makes please and thank you sound like prayers. He moves toward the seat. The caution. It matches his pace, honoring the journey between door and booth as if it were a long road coming to a gentle end. Not all heroes wear capes, some wear a jacket, polished by rain and sun and years of getting back up. Some enter a room and make it honest. He reaches the booth and rests his hand on the back of the seat. The neon from the window paints a thin line of blue across his knuckles. He glances at the menu already waiting, laminated, edges frayed, the kind that promises pancakes at midnight and kindness for breakfast. He breathes in coffee, butter, cinnamon, and something in his shoulders loosens. Outside, the wind pushes against the glass, impatient. Inside, a story steadies itself. The bell over the kitchen window dings again. Somewhere between the ding and the pour of fresh coffee, the room will be asked a question it cannot dodge. Who are we when no one is watching? What do we owe the people who gave us our ordinary nights? The camera holds a beat on the veteran's hand, scarred and steady as he sets his cap on the bench and sits, back straight, eyes kind. The world keeps spinning. In here, it's about to change. The bell above the diner door jingled again. That same bright, tinny chime that had welcomed birthday cakes, late-night regulars, and couples on first dates. But this time, the sound carried more weight than usual. This time, the bell announced someone who wasn't just stepping out of the cold, he was stepping out of history. The door creaked open, letting in a thin ribbon of night air. For a moment, the crowded diner barely noticed. Forks still clinked against plates. Laughter bubbled near the back booth, and a waitress poured a fresh round of coffee for a table of truckers who were halfway through swapping road stories. Life moved as it always did, fast, loud, distracted. And then heads began to turn. An older man stepped inside. His presence wasn't loud, but it carried something that pulled attention away from phones and pancakes. He was tall, though slightly stooped, moving slowly but deliberately. A cane tapped the tile floor. Tap, pause, step, tap, pause, step. And with each sound came a rhythm of resilience. His left leg was prosthetic, the mechanical joint hidden under neatly pressed trousers that had been patched more than once. His right leg bore the weight of years, steadying him as he crossed the threshold. He wore a faded military jacket. Its olive green fabric was worn thin at the elbows, edges frayed, seams softened by decades. A few patches were still visible, an airborne insignia, a name tag nearly unreadable from countless washes. The jacket was clean, carefully kept, but it carried the kind of wear that only comes from long marches and harder memories. On his head, a simple cap. Not flashy, not new, just a cap embroidered with the outline of an eagle and a word beneath it, veteran. He held himself with quiet dignity, his chin lifted enough to show pride, his eyes lowered enough to show humility. As he stepped further inside, a hush rippled across the room. Diners glanced at him, some with polite curiosity, some with quiet respect, and a few with the uncomfortable detachment of people who didn't know whether to smile or look away. The narrator's voice threaded softly through the moment, like a truth most had forgotten. Some heroes never announce themselves. They don't arrive with fanfare or applause. They carry no spotlight, only silence. And in that silence, more honor than a room full of medals. He did not come to be noticed. He came for something small, something he had earned 1,000 times over. A simple hot meal. The veteran paused near the door, removing his cap. He held it respectfully in his hand, the gesture instinctive. He gave a small nod to the waitress passing by, a polite smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Evening, ma'am," he said gently, his voice steady but soft, like gravel smoothed by years of use. She returned the smile, polite but rushed. "Evening, sir. Table for one?" "Yes, ma'am. Just me tonight." She gestured toward the corner booth beneath a framed black and white photo of the diner taken decades earlier. He nodded again, grateful, and began the careful walk across the room. The cane's rhythm followed him, echoing against the tiles. Diners shifted slightly in their seats, watching without wanting to seem like they were watching. A few nodded quietly to themselves, but most simply returned to their meals. At the booth, the veteran set his cap down gently on the bench beside him, as if it were a companion that had followed him everywhere for years. He eased himself into the seat, his movements deliberate. Once seated, he folded his hands on the table, straightened his back, and let out a quiet breath. The waitress appeared with a laminated menu. "Here you go, sir. Coffee to start?" He looked up at her with kind eyes, smiled faintly, and shook his head. "Thank you, ma'am, but no coffee tonight, just..." if I could trouble you for a simple hot meal. Whatever you recommend." His words were plain, but they carried weight. A simple hot meal. He didn't ask for steak or pie or anything fancy. Just warmth on a plate, something to fill the space hunger had left. The waitress nodded, scribbling quickly on her notepad. "We've got chicken pot pie fresh out of the oven. Would that do?" The veteran's smile deepened slightly, gratitude glowing faintly across the lines of his weathered face. "That would be just fine. Thank you." As she left, the veteran sat quietly, folding the menu closed without looking at it. His hands rested atop it, scarred hands, strong but worn, hands that had carried rifles and letters, that had built and repaired, that had saluted and held on. He gazed out the diner window at the neon reflections on the wet pavement, lost for a moment in thought. Around him, life continued as before. The birthday cake was served with sparklers, the truckers laughed so hard their coffee nearly spilled, and a young couple leaned across their booth whispering secrets. All the while, the veteran sat quietly in his corner booth unseen by most, asking for nothing more than a meal and a little peace. The narrator returned, somber yet steady. He carried battles the world forgot, names the world never knew, and yet he asked for less than anyone else in that room. Not recognition, not praise. Only a meal warm enough to remind him he still belonged in a world that too easily looks past men like him. The cane leaned against the booth, his cap resting beside him, his jacket folded slightly at the shoulders as he sat tall, humble, patient, present. The camera lingered, framing him in contrast. The quiet veteran against the noisy crowd, the humble against the flashy. The one who had given everything sitting unnoticed among those who had given nothing. And in that stillness, the question settled like a shadow. Would this man, this soldier, this survivor find respect within these walls? Or would he be reminded once again how quickly society forgets its heroes? The answer waited, just beyond the swing of the kitchen door. The kitchen door swung open with a slap, releasing the sizzling scent of grilled onions and frying bacon. Out came a young man in a crisp apron, hair slicked back with more effort than the night shift at a diner usually warranted. He was in his early 20s, face smooth, jaw set with arrogance, and his walk carried the careless confidence of someone who had never known hunger, never known war, never known loss. He approached the veteran's table with a pad in his hand and a smirk tugging at his lips. His eyes flicked down to the faded jacket, the patched trousers, the cane leaning against the booth. He didn't see honor. He didn't see sacrifice. He saw nothing but weariness and worn fabric. "You ready to order, old-timer?" he asked, his tone sharper than it needed to be. The veteran looked up, meeting his gaze with the calm patience of a man who had endured worse. His voice was steady, polite. "Yes, son. If I could, I'd like that chicken pot pie your waitress mentioned. Something warm for the evening." The waiter jotted lazily, barely glancing at the page. His eyes lingered on the veteran's cap, the faded veteran stitching, before rolling upward with a dramatic sigh. Under his breath, just loud enough for a few nearby diners to hear, he muttered, "This isn't a charity." The words slipped into the air like venom. The veteran's face didn't change. He didn't frown, didn't snap back. He simply folded his hands together on the table, his eyes lowering to the menu he hadn't needed. His dignity stayed intact, even as the sting of those words pressed against him. At the booth nearby, a couple exchanged glances. The woman's lips pressed thin, sympathy flickering across her face. The man shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Silence held them in place, just as it held everyone else in the diner. Some looked away, pretending not to hear. Others smirked faintly, entertained by the arrogance of the young waiter. The veteran reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather coin pouch, edges cracked with age. He set it on the table and slowly poured the contents into his hand. Quarters, dimes, a few nickels. All the loose change of a man who counted carefully. His fingers, thick and scarred from years of labor and service, moved gently over each coin, lining them in neat stacks. He didn't look ashamed, though embarrassment crept across his weathered features. He simply counted. 1 stack, 2, 3. His lips moved faintly, whispering numbers only he could hear. The waiter watched with thinly veiled disdain. "You sure you've got enough for that? Chicken pot pie ain't on the dollar menu," he said. chuckling under his breath. The words sliced through the air again. Diners heard it. They looked at their plates, suddenly finding their pancakes or sandwiches more interesting than the man who had walked with a limp into their midst. The veteran's hand paused on a dime. He closed his fingers around it, pressing it into his palm. His eyes drifted, not to the waiter, not to the coins, but somewhere far beyond the diner walls. The screen blurred, shifting into memory. He was 20 again, crouched in the dust of a foreign field. The air thick with smoke, the ground trembling with artillery. His uniform then was new, stiff with starch, his boots heavy but strong. Around him were men, boys really, laughing in the moments between fear, their eyes glimmering with youth and duty. He remembered their names. Every single one a flash, the roar of an explosion. Dirt and fire filled the air. When it cleared, 2 of those names were gone, their bodies broken in the smoke. The veteran's younger self had clutched the tags, pressed them against his chest, swearing he'd never forget, swearing he'd carry them home. The flashback dissolved. He sat again in the diner, the stacks of coins still on the table, the waiter still smirking. The narrator's voice slid through, low and reverent. He remembered what it cost. Every meal he ate after that was borrowed from those who never returned. Every coin he counted tonight was a reminder of what he had already given, a price far higher than money. The veteran cleared his throat softly, bringing himself back to the present. He offered a polite smile, though faint. "Yes, son, I believe I've got enough." The waiter scribbled half-heartedly, tapping his pen against the pad. He shrugged. "All right, hope you don't come up short." He turned on his heel, muttering again as he walked away. Places turning into a soup kitchen. The words weren't meant to be heard, but they were. They lingered in the silence that followed him, sharp as shrapnel. The veteran exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling in measured rhythm. He adjusted the cap sitting beside him on the booth and rested his hand on the table, fingers brushing the worn fabric of his jacket. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, watching raindrops streak against the glass. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. Inside, a hero sat quietly, dignity intact, while the world around him failed to see who he was. But the night wasn't finished. Respect may have been absent at that table, but justice was waiting, just beyond the edges of the scene, where another pair of eyes watched and listened. The diner buzzed with low chatter, silverware clinking against plates, the comforting hum of a jukebox in the corner. It was a place people came to relax, to laugh, to gossip, to forget the troubles of the day. But for one man, tonight was different. Tonight, it was a battle of another kind. The veteran sat in his booth, back straight despite the ache in his spine, hands folded carefully on the table. His worn cap rested beside him, its faded insignia barely visible under years of use. When the young waiter finally returned, pad in hand, and that same careless smirk etched across his face, the veteran offered a polite smile. "Yes, son," he said softly. "If I could, I'd like the chicken pot pie, please. Something warm tonight." The waiter didn't write it down, didn't even glance at his pad. Instead, he let out a short laugh, sharp, cutting, and raised his voice just enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Yeah, no. Not happening." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. Heads turned. Conversation slowed. The clinking of forks and knives faltered. The veteran blinked, confused. I don't understand," he said gently. "I thought it was on the menu." The waiter leaned one hand on the table, his voice dripping with disdain. "Look, old man, you're taking up space. These booths are for paying customers, not for people counting pennies like it's 1945. You think a handful of coins is going to cover a meal here? You're wasting my time." A sharp silence swept through the diner, broken only by the hiss of the kitchen grill. The veteran's face flushed. His hand instinctively went to the pouch of coins, fingers curling protectively around them. He spoke quietly, so quietly some had to lean in to hear. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I thought maybe..." But the waiter wasn't finished. His voice grew louder, projecting into the room. "You thought maybe what? That this place is some kind of charity? That we're just handing out food to anyone who wanders in off the street?" He glanced at the nearest tables, inviting them into the mockery. "Folks, come on. Does this look like a soup kitchen to you?" A few diners chuckled awkwardly, some out of genuine cruelty, others out of nervousness, not knowing what else to do. A group of teenagers near the counter pulled out their phones, smirking as they began to record. The veteran lowered his head, lips pressed tight. His hand moved to his chest, clutching at the fabric of his jacket. That jacket, faded, patched, its buttons dulled, was more than cloth. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was the weight of years spent fighting for people who now looked at him as if he were less than nothing. The narrator's voice cut in, solemn and heavy. Once he fought for their freedom. Now he fights for a little dignity. The veteran's eyes flickered toward the door as though considering leaving, but pride held him in place. He wouldn't make a scene. He wouldn't shout. That was never who he was. Instead, he offered a small, almost whispered apology. "I'm sorry. I'll go." His words trembled in the air, but the waiter didn't let him leave with grace. He barked another laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, maybe do that. Free up the space for people who can actually afford to be here." The humiliation deepened. Around the diner, reactions split like cracks in glass. A woman in the corner bit her lip, her hand hovering near her husband's arm, but she stayed silent. A man at the counter sipped his coffee, shaking his head but doing nothing. The teenagers recording snickered, whispering to each other. The veteran's hand tightened around his jacket. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. Silence was his shield. Dignity was his last weapon. The narrator's voice returned, low and mournful. He had carried brothers through fire, held the line in battles that scarred his soul, and buried friends whose names never left his heart. And now, after all of that, he stood defenseless against laughter, against the cruel indifference of those who had never known sacrifice. The camera lingered on his face, lined with years of hardship but still marked by quiet strength. His eyes glistened, not from weakness but from the weight of memories he refused to share with those who would never understand. In the background, the waiter moved on to another table, chuckling as though nothing had happened. The laughter of a few diners filled the silence he left behind, a cruel echo against the clatter of dishes. The veteran sat alone in his corner booth, clutching his jacket, his dignity frayed but not broken. And though no one spoke for him yet, someone was watching, someone who would. The humiliation still hung heavy in the air. The veteran sat quietly in his booth, his gnarled hand resting on the table, thumb brushing against the brim of his cap as if it were the last thing tethering him to dignity. Around him, laughter ebbed and flowed like a cruel tide, some diners smirking, some avoiding his gaze, others filming as though his pain were nothing more than entertainment. But not everyone laughed. In the farthest booth, tucked into the shadows near the window where rain streaked down in silver lines, someone else sat. At first, no one paid him much attention. He had been there the whole evening, silent, unassuming. A man in a dark hoodie and cap, broad shoulders hunched forward slightly, a plate of untouched food in front of him. It wasn't his stillness that drew notice. It was the weight of his presence. He didn't shift, didn't fidget, didn't join in the laughter. Instead, his gaze was fixed, steady and sharp, watching every moment unfold as though he had seen it all before. A couple of diners began to notice. At first, it was just a whisper from a table near the window. "Hey, do you see that guy over there?" Another leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Wait, don't tell me. Is that who I think it is?" The murmur spread, soft at first, then building in quiet waves through the diner. Heads tilted, eyes squinted past the low light and shadow. The smirk on the waiter's face faltered for just a moment as he noticed the whispers. But then he rolled his eyes, dismissing it. The stranger remained unmoving. His hands were clasped in front of him, knuckles large and scarred. His posture wasn't threatening, but there was a quiet power about it. A coiled strength, calm yet undeniable. Every movement in the room seemed to slow as people became more aware of him, as if gravity itself leaned in his direction. The veteran, however, hadn't noticed. His gaze was still cast downward, fighting to preserve what little pride he had left. He didn't know that eyes other than mocking ones were on him. The narrator's voice broke the silence, low and cinematic. In a room full of laughter and scorn, one man's silence spoke louder than words. He had seen cruelty before. He had seen arrogance before, and he had never been the kind to stand idly by. The whispers grew. "Is that him?" One teenager muttered, lowering their phone. "It can't be." "No way." Another diner, voice hushed but trembling with recognition. "I swear, that's The Rock." The words traveled quickly, rippling through the diner until even those who hadn't looked before were stealing glances, eyes wide, breath caught in their throats. The smirks vanished from more than a few faces. The atmosphere shifted, not yet fully, but enough to raise the tension like a held breath, and still, the stranger didn't move. He sat there, his hood casting a shadow over his eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't smiling, wasn't scowling, just watching the way the waiter strutted between tables, watching the way the veteran's hands trembled as he gathered his coins, preparing to leave in silence, watching injustice, measuring when to act. The narrator's voice returned, rising with the storm outside. He had waited long enough. The time for silence was ending. Soon the world in this diner would learn the true weight of respect and the price of arrogance. A fork clattered to the ground somewhere in the room. No one picked it up. Every eye was drawn to the hooded figure in the corner. The tension was unbearable now. The veteran began to rise slowly, preparing to slip out quietly, but the stranger's hand moved. Not fast, not loud, just a subtle shift, fingers drumming once against the table like a signal. And with that small, deliberate gesture, it became clear. This wasn't just another diner. This was a storm about to break. The diner, once alive with chatter and mocking laughter, grew still. Something shifted in the air, an unspoken tension that pulled every gaze to the man in the corner. He moved with slow deliberation, pushing his chair back. The scraping of the legs against the linoleum was deafening in the silence that followed. The stranger rose. He wasn't just tall, he towered. His frame blocked the neon light streaming through the window, casting him in half shadow, half glow. Every diner's eyes locked onto him, their whispers dying in their throats. The air was charged as if everyone sensed something unforgettable was about to happen. The veteran, still clutching his worn cap, glanced up in confusion. The waiter smirked, mistaking the moment for a joke. "What?" He scoffed, tossing the rag he'd been holding over his shoulder. "You gonna pay for him too? This isn't a charity, buddy." No answer. The man stepped forward, heavy boots echoing across the polished floor. Each stride seemed to reverberate through the diner, shaking loose the arrogance from the faces of those who had laughed moments ago. He reached the booth. He didn't glare. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached up, took hold of the hood of his sweatshirt and pulled it back. Gasps erupted instantly. Phones lifted into the air. Flashes clicked. Voices trembled. "Oh my God, it's him. No way, that's The Rock." Dwayne Johnson stood before them, larger than life. Every inch the presence that had silenced arenas, commanded screens. And now, this tiny diner. His expression was calm, his eyes sharp, not with anger, but with a heavy, unshakable resolve. The waiter froze, his smirk crumbling into pale silence. The rag slipped from his shoulder and fell unnoticed to the floor. The Rock extended a hand, not toward the waiter, but toward the bill on the table. His massive palm dwarfed the flimsy piece of paper as he lifted it, glancing once before tucking it into his jacket pocket. His voice was calm, steady, but it carried enough power to silence the room entirely. "I'll cover this," he paused, letting the words sink in, then added louder, his gaze sweeping the diner. "In fact, every veteran who walks through these doors will never pay again, not while I'm here." The room erupted. Applause broke like thunder. Diners stood to their feet, some clapping, some shouting, "Yes!" Others wiped their eyes, overcome with emotion. The veteran sat frozen, his lips trembling, eyes wide as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The waiter stammered, his arrogance collapsing into panic. I didn't mean, I was just..." His excuses fell apart under the weight of the applause and the unwavering gaze of The Rock. The veteran finally managed to speak, his voice breaking. "Sir, I don't deserve this." The Rock bent slightly, placing his hand firmly on the man's shoulder. "You deserve more than this world can ever repay. Tonight you get just a fraction of the respect you've earned." The crowd roared again, their cheers echoing off the walls, drowning out the storm still raging outside. The diner, once a place of humiliation, had transformed into a sanctuary of gratitude and respect. And in the center of it all, The Rock stood tall, not as a celebrity, not as a superstar, but as a man reminding the world what honor truly meant. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a silence far heavier than before. Every diner's eyes were glued to the giant standing in the center of the room. The Rock didn't bask in the attention. He simply stood, calm, steady, his hand resting on the bill he had claimed. The air felt charged, as though the walls themselves were waiting for him to speak. When his voice finally came, it was low, deep, and carried the weight of lived truth. I've sat here, listening, watching, and I'll tell you something. This moment isn't about me, it's about him. He nodded toward the veteran who sat stiffly in the booth, still clutching his old cap like it was a shield against the humiliation he'd endured. This man, the Rock continued, his voice rising slightly, walked into this place with nothing but dignity. He didn't ask for a parade. He didn't ask for attention. He asked for one thing, a hot meal. And the way he was treated, the way some of you laughed, says something about the world we've become. A murmur rippled through the crowd, uneasy, ashamed. Several people lowered their eyes, their earlier smirks now gone. The Rock straightened his broad shoulders, his presence filling the room like a storm gathering. I grew up with nothing. My mom worked herself to the bone just to keep us fed. There were nights we didn't know where we'd sleep. I know what it's like to be invisible, to feel small. But I also know this: respect isn't about the size of your wallet. It isn't about the shine on your shoes. Respect is about seeing someone else's pain and choosing to honor it. He turned then, his gaze cutting straight to the waiter, who stood frozen behind the counter. The young man swallowed hard, his arrogance stripped away. Respect isn't earned by mocking the weak, the Rock said firmly, his words sharp enough to carve through stone. Respect is earned by sacrifice. And this man, he gestured toward the veteran, sacrificed more than you or I could ever repay. The diner was silent. The only sound was the steady hum of the neon lights above. Then from one of the back booths, a soft voice broke through. Sarah, the pregnant woman who had been quietly watching, tears brimming in her eyes, whispered, "God bless you." The Rock inclined his head in acknowledgement, but he didn't smile. His focus was still on the lesson. He crouched slightly so he was eye level with the veteran, his tone softening. "Sir, you don't owe anyone an apology. You don't owe anyone shame. You've already paid a price none of us here could afford. Tonight, it's the world that owes you." The veteran's lips trembled, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Thank you, but I don't deserve this." The Rock placed one massive hand on the man's shoulder, steady, unyielding, like the weight of a promise. "You deserve more than the world could ever give back." The veteran blinked rapidly, his eyes wet, his voice breaking into silence. Around them, diners shifted uncomfortably, many dabbing at their eyes, others nodding solemnly. The Rock rose again, addressing everyone. His voice carried not just power but truth. Every time you pass a veteran on the street, every time you see someone struggling, you have a choice. You can look away, pretend it isn't your problem, or you can act. A seat, a meal, a kind word. That's all it takes. That's what respect looks like. Tears streamed down a woman's cheeks near the counter. A man who had laughed earlier now buried his face in his hands, ashamed. Families whispered to one another, their children staring wide-eyed at the man who had just turned a diner into a classroom of compassion. The Rock finished with a voice that shook the room. Don't forget this moment. Don't forget the sacrifices made so you could sit here free. Because freedom isn't free. It's bought by the blood, sweat, and tears of people like him. And the least we can do is show them respect. The room erupted again, not in shallow clapping, but in something deeper, more raw. Diners stood, some saluting the veteran, others reaching out to shake his hand. The waiter stood frozen, unable to speak, his arrogance crushed under the weight of truth. The veteran wiped at his eyes, his chest trembling with emotions too heavy for words. He looked up at the Rock, his lips forming the only words he could manage. "Thank you." The Rock nodded once, solemn and firm. "No, sir. Thank you." The Rock's words hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. The diner was silent, every clink of silverware stilled, every laugh extinguished. The veteran sat hunched, his hands trembling slightly as they clutched his faded cap. His face was lined with years, lines etched not just by age but by battles fought, grief endured, and a life lived with quiet resilience. The Rock crouched once more, his voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to," he said, his gaze warm, unyielding. "But if you're willing, tell them. Tell us your story. Let them know who you are, what you've carried. Because this moment, this lesson isn't just mine to give, it's yours. The veteran shifted uncomfortably, his throat tightening. His eyes darted across the room, faces stared back, expectant, ashamed, hopeful. He swallowed, his voice rough from years of silence. I'm not used to talking much, he began softly. I've lived my life trying to keep the noise inside me quiet. But maybe tonight it's time. He set his cap on the table, his fingers tracing its frayed edges like it was a relic of another world. His eyes drifted far away, back into memories no one else could see. I was 19 when I enlisted, just a kid from a small town. Didn't know much except that I loved my country. Thought I'd see the world, maybe make something of myself. What I didn't know was how much I'd lose. His voice cracked on the last word. He paused, gathering strength. The diners leaned forward unconsciously, the room holding its breath. I served in combat. Too many years, too many places where the heat never let up, where the nights felt longer than forever. I saw things no kid should ever see. Friends who never came home. Brothers who laughed with me one night and were gone by dawn. The air grew heavy. A woman covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. A man across the diner clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on the table. Even the waiter, once so smug, stood frozen, his eyes wide and wet with something new. Shame. The veteran's voice grew steadier as he went on, though the pain in his tone was unmistakable. I carried them, every one of them. Their voices, their faces. Sometimes at night when it's too quiet, I still hear them calling out. And I wonder, why me? Why did I come back when so many better men didn't? He looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, resting against the worn surface of the booth. When I came home, there weren't parades. Not always, thanks. Some people looked at us like we were broken, or like we were a burden. So I kept my head down, worked small jobs, mechanic, janitor, whatever I could. Helped my neighbors when they needed it. Never asked for much. Didn't want pity. Just wanted to live quietly, to honor the men I lost by keeping my own feet moving. The Rock listened intently. His massive frame leaned forward as if shielding the man from judgment. Around the diner, the silence was broken only by quiet sniffles. The veteran's eyes glistened now, though he fought to hold the tears back. I saved every penny I could. Didn't buy much for myself. Didn't need to. But tonight, I thought maybe I'd treat myself. Just a hot meal, a chance to sit down somewhere nice to remind myself that I still mattered, that I was more than the ghosts I carry. He glanced toward the waiter then, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. And instead I was told I didn't belong, that I was wasting space. The words struck like lightning. The waiter lowered his head, shame burning in his face, unable to meet the veteran's eyes. Diners shifted uncomfortably, guilt pressing down on them for their silence earlier. Some dabbed at their tears, others shook their heads, whispering apologies under their breath. The veteran drew in a shaky breath, his chest rising and falling. I don't need medals, don't need attention. But I'll tell you this, every man and woman who put on that uniform, they gave up pieces of themselves so you could sit here free. Some gave up everything. And all I wanted tonight was to feel human again, to remember that maybe I still matter to somebody. He stopped then, his words trailing off, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his confession. For a long moment, the diner was silent, no one daring to speak. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fans, the faint sizzle from the kitchen. Then, softly from somewhere in the back, a voice said, "You do matter." Another joined in, "God bless you." A man near the counter stood and clapped slowly, his eyes red. Others followed, rising to their feet, applause filling the room like a wave. It wasn't loud or mocking this time. It was reverent, heavy with gratitude and shame turned into respect. The veteran blinked rapidly, overwhelmed, his lips trembling. The Rock placed a steady hand on his shoulder again, anchoring him, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "They see you now. They'll never forget." The camera lingered on the veteran's face, tired, scarred, but lit by something new. Dignity, restored. The applause lingered, echoing in the small diner until it felt like the walls themselves had absorbed the sound. The veteran sat still, his faded jacket draped over his shoulders, his hands trembling slightly as if he didn't quite believe what was happening. For so long he had lived quietly in the shadows, his sacrifices invisible, his dignity overlooked. But now, for the first time in years, he wasn't forgotten. The Rock remained beside him, towering like a sentinel, his steady hand still on the veteran's shoulder. "You matter," he had said. And those words had cracked something open, not just in the veteran's heart, but in the hearts of everyone watching. Slowly, the spell broke. Diners began to move, to rise, to come forward. The first was a woman in her 40s wearing a blazer over her blouse, her eyes glassy with tears. She approached the booth, her steps deliberate, her voice soft but firm. "Sir," she said, "my husband ran a charity foundation for veterans before he passed. I've kept it going, but it's men like you who give it meaning. If you'd allow me, I'd like to connect you with our team. We can help with resources, with community. You won't have to carry this weight alone anymore." The veteran blinked, stunned. His lips parted, but no words came. He simply nodded, overwhelmed. Another diner, a burly man in work boots with grease still under his fingernails, stepped forward next. He pulled a wad of bills from his wallet and placed them gently on the table. "I want to cover your meals here. Not just tonight, but for as long as you want to come back. A year, 2, however long it takes. You've already paid your dues. Let me handle this." The veteran shook his head instinctively, his pride resisting. "Son, you don't have to." But the man cut him off gently. "No, sir. I want to." One by one, more diners came forward. A young couple with their toddler pressed the child's tiny hand into the veteran's weathered palm, whispering, "Thank you for your service." An elderly man, himself once in uniform decades ago, gave a trembling salute. Strangers lined up just to shake his hand, to say the words that had gone unsaid for too long. "We see you. We honor you. We remember." The Rock stood back slightly now, letting the moment belong to the man who had earned it. His eyes scanned the room, watching as humanity, raw, unfiltered, unashamed, poured forth. The arrogant waiter lingered by the counter, his face pale, his arms crossed tightly. His earlier cruelty seemed to shrink him now, swallowed by the sheer outpouring of respect filling the room. He tried to look away, but the weight of his shame kept pulling his eyes back to the man he had mocked. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, he stepped forward, his voice quiet, cracking. I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong." The veteran looked at him, really looked, and after a long pause, he nodded. "Not to excuse, not to erase, but to accept. Learn from it, son," he said gently. "That's all any of us can do." The crowd hushed at those words, the grace in them heavier than any rebuke could have been. The Rock chose that moment to step in again. His voice was steady, resonant, carrying through the room with ease. "This man," he said, gesturing toward the veteran, "represents thousands, millions like him. Men and women who gave their youth, their health, their peace of mind so the rest of us could sit here in freedom. And too often they're forgotten. Pushed aside, left to struggle." He glanced around the diner, locking eyes with as many as he could. "Not tonight. Tonight we remember. And I promise you this, he's not going to be alone anymore. Not while I've got something to say about it." Gasps filled the room, followed by cheers. A woman clutched her chest, whispering, "God bless you." Others nodded fervently, tears streaming down their faces. The veteran's own eyes brimmed now, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I thought the world forgot us, that people had moved on, that what we gave didn't matter anymore." The Rock leaned closer, his tone soft but powerful. "Not tonight. Not ever again." The diner erupted. Applause thundered like a storm, but this time it wasn't just noise, it was unity. The room seemed to glow, alive with compassion. Strangers who had walked in as individuals left as something greater. A community bound by respect, by gratitude, by the reminder that freedom was bought with sacrifice. The veteran sat straighter now, his back no longer bent under invisible weight. His hands, though still trembling, gripped the table with renewed strength. Around him, faces smiled, not pitying, but honoring. And above it all stood the Rock, his faint smile betraying a quiet pride. Not in himself, but in the room, in the people, in the truth that had been restored. The narrator's voice cut in, low and resonant. Once, he thought the world had forgotten him. But in a small diner on an ordinary night, respect returned. And in that moment, unity was not just remembered, it was reborn. The camera pulled back, showing the entire diner bathed in warmth. Diners shaking hands, the veteran smiling through tears, the Rock watching over them like a guardian. It was no longer just a meal. It was redemption. It was humanity rediscovered. The diner quieted again, not from discomfort this time, but from reverence. What had begun as a night of humiliation for a forgotten hero had transformed into something far greater, a reminder of what it truly means to honor those who sacrificed everything. The camera lingered on the veteran as he rose from his booth, moving with slow but deliberate steps. His cane tapped against the tile, steady and strong. The weight that had bowed his shoulders when he first entered was gone. In its place stood dignity, restored, undeniable, unshakable. The diners watched him with admiration. No longer did they see just an old man in a worn jacket. They saw the soldier who had once carried burdens heavier than any they could imagine. They saw the courage that had endured long after the battles ended. They saw a man who had given his best years so that they could live freely. The Rock walked beside him, not leading, not overshadowing, simply there, a quiet pillar of respect. Together they moved toward the door as the narrator's voice filled the room like a final chord in a symphony. That night, a forgotten veteran reminded the world that respect is not bought, it is earned through sacrifice. The camera cut briefly to the young waiter. Head bowed, his arrogance dissolved into humility. A waiter learned that arrogance is weakness. Then, shots of the diners. Some wiping their eyes, others still clapping softly. Families holding one another a little closer. And a room full of strangers discovered that true greatness lies in gratitude. The door opened, the night air rushing in. The veteran paused on the threshold. He glanced back once, his eyes glimmering, as if to say a silent thank you, not for the meal, but for the recognition. The reminder that his life still held value. The camera followed him as he stepped outside, the neon diner sign glowing above him, his silhouette framed against the dark street. His shoulders were tall now, his steps measured with pride. The music swelled, strings and piano, tender yet triumphant, fade to black. White text appeared on the screen, steady and bold. Never forget those who gave everything for our freedom. The final note held, echoing in silence, leaving the audience not just with a story, but with a duty to remember, to honor, to respect.